What is good? Deepak Chona, Sportsman Analytics, bringing you today's biggest injury discounts at ADP. A lot to get to, so let's get it popping. Starting with Tyreek Hill. Now, you can get him right now at wide receiver 13, and obviously we know his prior peak is much beyond that level. He played all of 2024 with a very real wrist injury. It was a surgical injury. He had 2 surgeries, first to fix the injury and then to remove some implants. And the 2 surgeries should not scare you. That's usually part of the plan in these types of cases. And he's very likely to be fully cleared by the start of camp, or certainly if not by then very likely by week 1. The data on this is actually pretty favorable. It also explains the major drop-off that he experienced in his production last year. In addition to Tua being in and out of the lineup, Tyreek Hill in separating, getting off the line and also catching, you're going to see limitations due to this very severe wrist injury. So don't really think we can look at last year as a sign that he has reached the end of his prime. Next, we have another aging receiver, Stefon Diggs. He is age 31, but you're drafting him at wide receiver 45 right now. We'd lean towards him being ready week 1. It's a little optimistic for a 31-year-old, but all indications are that he had a clean ACL tear, and the timing would put him around clearance right around week 1 and actually even a little slightly before in the data. Now, he, in terms of performance, has put up 6 straight 1,000-yard seasons, has had 0 or 1 game missed basically all of those seasons prior to 2024 when he tore his ACL. So Stefon Diggs has a good chance of getting back to the level that he was at pre-injury. The data says 85% the first 4 weeks of the season, and by week 5 projects to hit around the 90% point. So he may have a little bit of an unsteady first few weeks, but eventually that Drake May, Stefon Diggs stack is starting to look more and more appealing. Next, we have Isiah Pacheco. Now, he's being drafted at running back 29. He does have a very promising chance to become the lead running back in a Patrick Mahomes offense, which is probably worth more than running back 29 if it materializes that way. Think about the ankle injury that he had last year as derailing his entire 2024 performance. He rushed back after only 10 weeks, but that accelerated return means that you rush back without near the level of your pre-injury strength. So with that accelerated return, you would expect the production drop-off that you've seen from Isiah Pacheco. Also saw a similar result from Mark Andrews the previous year when he came back. Now, Isiah Pacheco does project to hit his 90% pre-injury level by about week 1. So overall, pretty promising outlook for the upcoming season. Then we have Justin Herbert of the Chargers. Now, he's being drafted at QB 15. I would think based on talent alone, QB 15 may be underselling that. However, looking at Herbert as an exclusively pocket-based quarterback may be a little bit influenced by what happened last year. He had a preseason foot injury. The plantar fascia was reportedly aggravated on him, and that has a high chance of getting re-aggravated during the season. So therefore, they managed it. They didn't run him much. Then he had another high ankle sprain early on in the season. And the combination would have caused many players to actually even sit out. But in Herbert's case, he played right through. We just shouldn't forget that it would decrease his mobility pretty substantially with having that combination of injuries to his lower extremity. The comments that we're hearing so far suggest that he's in line for potentially more running in 2025, which with his legs that he has shown in the past, that could be very promising for his fantasy value and certainly good chance of beating that QB 15 mark. Next, we have his former teammate J.K. Dobbins being drafted right now at running back 40. Now, he had an MCL sprain towards the end of last year. He did return from it and didn't seem to have any lasting performance dip. That is really the most common case. Usually these MCL sprains that are treated non-operatively heal in a few weeks' time and are not likely to linger or cause a performance dip in the following season. Now, if you go back to 2023, the injury that took him out early on was the Achilles tear. And that historically has been a brutal injury for a running back or any skill position player. It's gotten progressively better, but we still find in the data that despite the early returns, we usually don't see players achieve close to their pre-injury strength until they get to the second season. So with that in mind, J.K. Dobbins, the data does favor him upgrading his performance and explosiveness really from the last year to now. Then we have another Achilles, Kirk Cousins. So he's being listed at QB 35 right now, and obviously as a backup quarterback, you're not going to rush to draft him in most formats. Now in Superflex, this might be a deep sleeper. And the reason is we're not really convinced that he's washed. He rushed back from an Achilles, didn't have that same level of mobility, and partly as a result of that, and partly just as the nature of him taking a bad hit week 10, he severely injured his shoulder and elbow. The next 4 games, he had 1 touchdown to 8 interceptions, and then, of course, he was benched for Penix. Now, the Falcons are clearly moving on, but often we see movement of quarterbacks in season. Kirk Cousins is the prime example, prime target for that type of movement this year. So if you can snatch him up for 0 cost right now, it may not be a bad idea. Then we have Nick Chubb. And as a Texans fan, I can't lie, I will be rooting for this one. But at running back 54, Nick Chubb is costing very, very little. Now, the foot fracture that he had last year did end his season. It wasn't treated with surgery, and therefore it doesn't have typically a lasting, lingering impact on performance going into the next year. The important thing with Nick Chubb is similar to Dobbins before. We talked about the 2023 injury he had and how that actually tends to improve for 2 years post sustaining the injury. And so that was a multi-ligament knee injury. For Nick Chubb, it was actually his second multi-ligament knee injury on that same knee. So in truth, if you look at the longevity argument here, you probably are going to see a quick decline in Nick Chubb's career in the next several years. Now, is that likely to be this year? I would say not necessarily, and the data suggests that these even severe multi-ligament knee injuries are recoverable. It's just a question of to what degree. So with that in mind, the data projects him to be at 85% of his 2023 pre-injury level. And I know we only saw him out in the field for a couple of weeks in 2023 before he had that injury. But again, you're looking at what could be a very solid player, likely limited dosages because you will have to load manage that knee, very high risk of developing arthritis if he hasn't already. And furthermore, the overall constellation of injury for him does lead him to a high risk of missing some time. Still, though, running back 54 is basically no cost. Then we have Deebo Samuel. Now, you're getting him at wide receiver 40. The important thing with Deebo Samuel is, one, the offense is obviously very different, but two, he caught pneumonia mid-season last year. He barely missed any time, but it's hard to imagine that that doesn't impact your performance as a high-level athlete. And I think the data does show that for him it did. He had 77 yards per game before, so not world-beating, but it was down to 42 yards per game in the rest of the season after getting that pneumonia diagnosis. So with that in mind, you would expect Deebo Samuel, just by nature of having that illness mid-season, to behave, to perform more like his pre-injury self or pre-illness self. The one thing that Deebo Samuel is a little bit interesting in with regard to injury risk is that his touch distribution for a wide receiver has tended to be skewed a little bit towards the rushes versus receptions. Now, rushes, carries, are a little bit higher injury risk per play than receptions. And if you think about that logically, it potentially can be explained by when you take a carry, you're getting hit often by the larger players on the field, meaning the defensive line, the linebackers. When you take when you get a reception, you're probably more likely to be hit by the secondary. Furthermore, when you're out on the perimeter, a reception, you can kind of predict to some degree more where the hits may be coming from. Brace your body in different ways than the chaotic hits of going through the middle of a line. So with that in mind, if Deebo Samuel is more towards the receiving end for his touch distribution, that could bring him down back to baseline level for the position injury risk. However, if he continues to get a fair number of his touches through carries, 20% or more is the sort of target that we see in the data, where there's a line shift. And in that case, then he would be at an elevated risk of injury relative to the other wide receivers. Next up, we have Colston Loveland of the Bears. Now, he's getting priced at tight end 13 right now, but keep in mind, he was the number 10 overall pick in the draft. And this ADP is likely depressed simply by the fact that he has a questionable tag listed next to his name. A lot of people are shying away from that, and they are sort of overlooking that what he had done was an AC joint shoulder surgery. Now, tight ends don't typically see a large performance dip when they return from this type of injury or surgery. He also played through this all of last year. So the timeline overall does favor this being a return by week 1, but even the fact that he played through this and the Bears knew about this prior to him being drafted suggests that this was all part of the plan, and we shouldn't be overly concerned about that questionable tag, although we should scoop him up at tight end 13 most likely. And then we have Keaton Mitchell. Now, RB 74 right now, so very, very late in the drafts, if at all drafted. The reason to take Keaton Mitchell or to consider is, yes, Derrick Henry is an older running back. He has shown no signs of slowing down, so I don't know that that's much of an argument. However, Keaton Mitchell came on strong at the end of his rookie year, only to tear his ACL, which, because it happened so late, it likely hurt his production all of 2024 as well. Now, keeping in mind that Keaton Mitchell is a young player, he's highly, highly athletic, and his explosiveness is a key part of his game. He is likely to have regained that by now, but not likely to have regained that during the 2024 season. We therefore think if you're going to take a late round flyer on a backup running back, this is probably one of the ones to choose. And that's all we got for now. Make sure you keep dropping your questions in the comments, and we'll hit them all soon. Thank you for joining.